Hey there, and welcome to Conversations Worth Your While. It's the podcast where we dig into ideas and insights that will help you to unleash what you were born to bring. I chat with heart-led experts and ask the questions that I know you're thinking about, and we explore conversations that spark growth, shift perspectives, and help you to show up fully in your life, at work, and for those around you. And today, our topic is going to be very, very interesting. We are talking about courage. We are going to be talking about going from an approval addict to being a courage infuser. And this conversation is most definitely worth your while because we all know what it's like to get stuck in our own heads. We seek validation and then we go round and round in fear, in shame, in heaviness, and usually deciding this means something about who we are. And right now, there's just so much changing in the world and we're feeling uncertain. And it's really easy for our systems to stay on high alert. So if you've ever wanted a way out of that high alert loop, out of that seeking validation loop, we're going to share with you today an approach which is going to have you moving through life with courage. And I know you're going to love it. So I'm your host. I'm Linda Bucher. And if the life that you're in no longer fits, this space is for you. Because through this podcast and in my coaching work, I guide impact-driven humans like you to shed what no longer fits and to reconnect with your gifts and bring your life into alignment with who you are and what you want. And because when that happens, you will unleash what you were born to bring, and you will create meaningful, lasting impact in your work, in your relationships, and in your community. And that's what you're here to do. So if that sparks something within you, you can find me at lindabucher.com. All right, once again, we are talking about going from approval addict to courage infuser. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Amy Pearson. Amy is a master life coach and a mentor. She's making her beautiful ripples and unleashing what she was born to bring in the world in a very unique way. Amy is a former approval addict, and she is now a courage infuser and a guide to guides. She helps the guides in the world to step into their courage so that they can express and create from their authentic self. So Amy, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's talk about the approval addict part first. And I just want to bring up that when I was a brand new coach, you had done a coach spot call about approval addict. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I might be an approval addict. And it was more, I was more on the perfectionism side. And you shared something with me that was so, like, it stuck with me. I mean, it's been like 16 years since I heard that from you. And it really stuck with me. And I'm sure that it will resonate with our listeners. When we're mired in perfectionism or approval and outside validation, the very thing we're trying to avoid, we're creating. And we're trying to avoid judgment and criticism and shame. And all we're doing the whole time is judging and criticizing and shaming ourselves. Right. That stuck with me for 16 years. And I can't tell you how many people I've shared that with because it was the beginning of my journey of becoming a former perfectionist or a imperfect perfectionist or a perfect imperfectionist, whatever we want to call it. So, so let's talk about this approval addict, these behaviors and the shame that it creates.
Yeah. I mean, just to touch on what you just said, I mean, one of the interesting things about looking at the world through the lens of consciousness is you start to realize that when you're in a certain energetic state, like fear, you are going to scan your environment for things to be afraid of, and you're going to see attack energy. That's going to be your lens. If you're looking out at the world from this like unfulfilled desire energy, you're going to find out that everything in your environment is stuff that you can't have or that you don't have or that you're lacking. And so when you start to see that you can shift your perspective and look at things from a different angle, maybe it's through just acceptance energy, then you find that your environment is going to mirror that acceptance back to you. And so, one of the things I find is that when we are really anchored in states like fear, it can be really heavy. And so we tend to cycle through thoughts and perceptions that lead us right back to the exact energetic state that we're emanating out to the world. And
Mhm.
so this has been a journey for me. And, when I guess I would start by just saying that I had a rocky childhood. I had a lot of stuff going on where I didn't feel like I was very seen, very valued. Kind of just felt like I was in the way. And so, one of my coping styles as I grew into an adult was just to see if there are any ways that I could extract validation from, people around me. If I could be the one that was achieving, or if I was collecting gold stars, or if I could create a facade that looked a certain way to the external world, then I felt like I would be safe, or I could be lovable, or I could get the things that I wanted. And so it's a behavioral pattern, I think, that, that stemmed from just not feeling very seen. And yeah, so I would say that I was pretty addicted to bending myself into a pretzel to extract as much validation as I could in the world.
Yeah, I think that's really common with many people, and it always really does stem from being in childhood. I like
Mhm.
that you brought up the concept of not being seen. Um, and, I felt that I think a lot of people feel that, especially when we're teenagers, because we don't even know who we are. And we're trying to fit in and belong. And what's happening with us is we're kind of getting in this habit of contorting ourselves to be who we're not, never
Yeah.
asking who we are. And again, as children, we're changing like by the minute, so it is kind of hard to say who am I. We're not really taught to do that. And I know like the energetic place I must have been in when I was very little, my very earliest memory of feeling like I wanted someone to feel sorry for me actually was in
Mhm.
kindergarten. Like it was so weird. And I know what happened. It was my baby sister was born. She was getting all the attention. I had another sister who got all the attention when she was born, which is the point my mom said I started calling myself by my name instead of me or I, like as if she couldn't understand that I was the one who wanted, like Linda wanted something instead of the baby, you know? And,
Right.
um, and so I must have felt like unseen or not important, from that very young age. And then, that propagates as you go through. So then people who know me now, I am like this confident, outward, giant energetic person, and I'm like, oh no, I was a wallflower. They're like, that's impossible. But it was kind of like my way of stepping back,
Mhm.
to just kind of be like, well, if other people are more important than me, then I guess I'll just step back. So it's so interesting how as children we
Yeah.
come up with these ideas, given the circumstances, and it's the best we can do as children, right?
Right. Well, we're very impressionable and we don't really have access to our logical mind to think about, why we might be seeing things in a certain way. We just feel the feelings and make the assumptions and then launch into the behavioral patterns. But it's kind of a catch-22 when you think about like wanting to be seen, not feeling like you have value as you are, and then you morph into these kind of patterns where you're trying to compensate for that. But many of us also want to express and create from our authentic self. And so it becomes a bit of a catch-22 when we start to bend ourselves in a pretzel to extract validation, but all the while we're sort of sacrificing our own authenticity. And so it becomes a question of how can we feel safe? How can we stay regulated, expressing and creating from our authentic self, not sacrificing who we are for this false sense of belonging that isn't really real?
That isn't real for sure. I love that. Like, Brene Brown says the difference between fitting in and belonging is fitting in requires that you change who you are, and belonging
Mm.
requires that you don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
I know that the concept of authentic self might be new to some listeners. So let's talk a little bit about the authentic self. Like I'm not sure people walk around thinking about whether they're living in authenticity or not, but it is pretty huge once you recognize what that means. So I'd love if you'd share a little bit more about authenticity. authentic self.
It kind of reminds me, I think this was attributed to Michelangelo, but I could be wrong. But it's basically this idea that there's when Michelangelo was creating statues, sculpting and making this beautiful art from these rocks, these like solid chunks of marble, he would say that he could see that he knew that the statue was inside. And it was just about removing whatever was, getting in the way of that. And I think that's kind of what authentic self to me means is that, you know, it's sort of true in nature. It's like nature knows how to return to balance. There's not, nature isn't trying or striving or, putting pressure on itself. It just naturally knows how to be in balance. And I think, our authentic self, the one that is here to express and create, is also just there underneath all the distortion. And that distortion is kind of what we talked about before. It's sort of like these these perceptions, this lens that we sort of uh, acquire just because we don't know any better when we're very young and impressionable. And so we have these layers of distortion that impact how our lens, how we see the world, and the choices and the behaviors and the relationships all unfold from there. And so it's really about kind of how do we chip away at that distortion to find sort of that authentic expression underneath it all that wants to be in balance.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the questions I ask like people I'll work with. They'll be like, I don't know what's next, and I'm like, well, you can't figure that out until you discover who you are outside of roles, outside of responsibility, outside of all the baloney that you've been collecting in your head and beliefs that
Mm,
are not a not they're not right for you. And
mm,
when you strip all that away, chisel that all away, and you find who you are, that's the beginning. That's where we start. And a lot of times people are nervous. They're like, well, what if I don't like who I find? And I'm like, oh, honey, you're going to love who you find. It's always amazing. And
mm,
the last time many adults have felt like their true selves, they were 4 years old, you know, unencumbered by that social self, that how do I fit in? What do I have to do? What's right? What am I supposed to be doing in this world according to
mm,
everybody else? And I think people worry that if they get back to that not, like, okay, well, what if I do love who I find, but what if the people around me don't love who I find? Like, what
mm,
about that? So it's a big fear to be like my authentic self. Do I even want to know who he or she is? Because what if nobody else likes them? So
mm.
I get that can be a difficult um, like a difficult thing to grasp around. But for people like me and you, the guides that you guide, we recognize that is the way that we become the best of ourselves, so we can
Yeah.
move forward in the way that we can be there in the best way for those around us.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think the human doesn't really like change, and it's sort of ironic because that's the one thing that we can count on is change. But we don't love change just because we don't like what's not predictable. And, we like to be able to understand what is going to happen, how it's going to play out, whether or not we'll be able to address that, whatever happens in a way that would allow us to come out the other side bigger, faster, stronger. And so what we do is we either, we tend to contract, we tend to make excuses, we tend to stay stuck and frozen. And so that is actually why the topic of courage is really important to me. And I really feel like it is sort of the missing link because we make it, a lot of times we don't understand why we're not moving forward, why we're stuck, why we're in these behaviors. And we think somehow we have to be ready, we have to be confident. And courage is really the bridge, I think, that allows us to address change, address the unknown, and all the other challenges, whether it's the relationship pushback or anything else that can keep us sort of in that contracted, frozen state.
Yeah. And courage, just to be clear for everyone, is not the absence of fear, because that's a normal thing. Courage is really about being in an energetic place where you're willing to move despite or in spite of this fear. So I'd love if you would talk a little bit more about that energy of
Yes.
courage.
Yeah, I would love to. So, I am obsessed with the work of someone named David Hawkins, and he wrote a book called Power versus Force. He's no longer alive, but he is someone who was a spiritual teacher, but also a scientist. And he was an expert in something called orthomolecular psychiatry and co-wrote research with a Nobel laureate. So he had one of the largest psychiatric practices in the country. This guy is no joke, and he is the real deal. And he was able to, through his research, he was able to link energetic state. He was able to measure energetic state objectively. And so he created something called the map of consciousness. And I actually have a visual. I know you're not some people are not going to be able to see it, but this is a visual of what this map is. And what I want to explain is that he has attached sort of values to certain energetic states. And so you can see here that it kind of is a whole scale, and it
Mhm.
starts at shame, it goes guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, pride, and then you've got this line here. And then on the other side of this line, this is courage. And so courage is a threshold energy. And then from courage, you go to, I believe that's neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, and peace, and then enlightenment. And just a quick caveat, the fact that he has energetic states and that you're seeing this as kind of a progression isn't to say that some energetic states are good and some energetic states are bad, and that if you are if you're in the energy of fear, or if you're in grief, or if that you're in shame today, that there's something wrong with you. Because the way that I see it, all emotions carry with them incredible wisdom and feedback. And they actually, if we're courageously willing to turn to them with curiosity, can teach us a lot about how we can then navigate to energetic states where, from courage or above, you start to get into these states where they put you in a place of power, versus when you're in these states here that are under the threshold of courage, below the line, so to speak, they'll put you in the state of force. And so what that means is that anytime you're operating and taking action or seeing the world through an energy of force, you're literally creating a timeline where you're going to be in a lose-lose sort of proposition, or it could be a win-lose. But essentially, restriction, resistance. Those energies are they drain you. They make you weaker. Versus when you're in an energy of courage, you're able to operate from a place of power, which puts you in win-win propositions where you're adding to the world versus subtracting to the world. And so it literally changes your timeline reality. It literally changes the lens with which you see the world. And the beautiful thing about it is that that threshold energy is courage, which you just kind of shared is not comfortable, or else it wouldn't be courage. But I think many of us don't really understand that, or we're not aware of that, so that we don't usually use it with intentionality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, first, I love that you pointed out that there's nothing wrong with you if you're feeling one of those lower energies. The thing to do is to, ask yourself, how might I get to courage, to a more powerful place? Sometimes, like I created something like just on the fly one day, many, many years ago with a client. He was going to be firing his manager. He's a musician. He was going to be firing his manager. And we were designing the conversation because, he was like, this person's not doing enough, and it was all about like, it was this person, the client was the victim. And this is like session one. And And I said, well, let's just start with how you want to feel when you're all done with this, with this meeting. How would you love to feel? He's like, well, I'd love to feel proud of myself. I'd love to feel free. I'd love to feel open. I'd love to feel excited for the future. I said, okay, great. So here's what I want you to do. Before you get into this meeting, you spend 20 seconds in each one of those ways you want to feel, and you bring them in with you to the meeting. So, and they're more powerful feelings. They're more positive and more powerful. And that, therefore, instead of conducting this from the you're wrong and I'm right energy, it was from the I'm really proud of myself for understanding what I really need from my manager and knowing that I'm going to be moving on to someone else. And at the end, this manager actually thanked him for his feedback because we designed some positive type things based in positive energy. So it's amazing how you will move through the world differently when you can see it differently and when you can approach it from a more powerful place that is a peaceful power instead of like this client. Yes, he had power, he was paying the manager, so he had power to do whatever he wanted, but that energy of like, I'm right and you're wrong and you're not giving me what I need was the absolute, we had to throw that out, and come from this courage place.
Yeah, so anything that's below the line is really separation consciousness. And so you would naturally think in terms of us, them, or, one of the other ways that you would think is sort of like timelines where it's like, if I get to this, then I can be happy, then I can feel successful. It's when you're above the line, you're thinking in terms of unity and connection and basically unity. The other thing, though, that I was going to say too is that when you're below the line of courage, these energies are heavy. So we know this through just our emotional experience of them. If you're in shame or you're in anger, if you're in grief, or you're in even apathy, any of those, it's like we know that they're uncomfortable, but they're also energetically heavy. And so if you're, say, for example, like think about a time when you're angry and maybe you had a reaction from being angry. And then from that reaction, you started to feel guilty. And then from that guilt, you started to start to feel fearful, or you just tend to cycle through those energies without really being aware of it.
Right.
And what's interesting is that when you're using the energetic states with intentionality, you can get yourself to courage, acceptance, neutrality. What happens is you find that you have more energy. It's a generative power means it's adding to versus subtracting. And so you are much more able to stay in those more helpful energies. And so it's really interesting, and this is one of the reasons why I consider myself kind of an evangelist of this tool, is that when we understand the dynamics, then we can start to be more intentional and proactive about how we see the world and what lens we choose to step into.
Right. So let's go back to our approval addicts, the ones who clicked on the title, like, okay, how do I realistically get out of this and step into this courage? Now that we've explained the energy of courage. So approval addicts are swimming in the very bottom of what you showed us is shame, absolutely in shame, even if we're unaware of it. And what approval addicts, what it looks like is putting everyone else before you. That's one of the ways it looks like. Saying yes all the time when you really want to say no. Like you said, contorting yourself into a pretzel for other people. Could be a boss, could be a friend, could be your children, could be your spouse. So what I recognize is the I'm not enough core belief that's at the bottom of this, like this root cause, okay, of I'm not actually worthy of all this happiness. Everyone else is, so I'm just going to give it to them, and maybe that'll prove to me or them that I am worthy, but I'm not really sure. So they've all got, everyone's got some, I have like this little thing, I call it the worthiness repair shop that I do with my clients, because everybody has some degraded sense of worthiness, not actual worthiness. That's always a bazillion percent worthy, every single human, always and every time, no matter what you're doing. However, our perception gets kind of wonked up, usually in childhood, like we talked about. So if someone is feeling not good enough, I know I have my ways of working with them, but I'd love to know how this map of consciousness, how you pragmatically would help somebody who's feeling I'm not enough. Like that's, so I get, yeah, I'm trying to get outside validation. I want everyone to prove to me, because then finally maybe I'll feel enough, because of when I was a child, my parent or somebody, gave me the impression that I'm not good enough, and I've been carrying that with me my whole life. So
Yeah.
pragmatically, how would you use this tool?
And by the way, I think seeking external validation is also a symptom of just not being really in our own power. And I think it's systemic in our culture where we've been listening to outside authority, giving away our power to people outside of us. And as coaches, I think our superpower is really to help people to source that from within. And so, in terms of pragmatics, I think what happens is whether we're recognizing that we're believing that we're worthy or not, we typically find ourselves in patterns of behavior where we're seeking safety, wholeness, the answers, anything that, we're essentially trying to extract that from the outside world. And so the thing I think that the reason we do this is because we think that that's going to keep us safe, because at one point we got feedback that it wasn't safe, and we never want to experience that feedback
Right.
again. And so it's sort of like it's this catch 22. We want to be visible, but we don't feel safe being visible. So then we will fall behind. We will sort of like convince ourselves of, things like we're not worthy, or that it's not safe, or, we'll use excuses to hide behind, or, any number of ways that will kind of just get in our own way. And so if that's you, and it's going to manifest in different ways for different people, I think the first thing to recognize is that it's basically your nervous system. You don't feel safe. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is going to tell us that before we get to self-actualization, we have to address the safety piece. And so
Mm-hmm.
the safety piece gets addressed pragmatically when we start to be more willing to take action, to be more visible, to be seen, to use our voice. And we do that through the energy of courage. And so that could look like, just what the question that you ask yourself is, okay, if I were to look at this exact circumstance from the energy of courage, what does it look like for me to step into courage and do this? What does that sound like? What thoughts does that bring up to me? It's not going to be comfortable, because otherwise it wouldn't be courage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is like a lot of times we convince ourselves that we have to wait for confidence, that we have to wait for readiness, this feeling of ready, that we have to stop feeling like an imposter. And that's the problem, is that we'll just wait for our entire lives. And so essentially it's stepping into courage is first the awareness that courage is the threshold energy that
Mm-hmm.
allows you to then step into power. But then when you can ask yourself, what does it look like for me to address this situation from an energy of courage? And then we start to take, could be micro actions. It's going to look different for everyone. We start to retrain our nervous system that it actually is not only safe to express and create as our authentic self, but we actually then start to invite authentic belonging into our lives. And
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes a feedback loop. And I think that it's actually not that complicated. And I think sometimes we think, I've got to heal my inner child. I've got to go and, do this modality for years. I've got to go, meditate with the monks in the Himalayas. And really, it's just like, what does this look like for you to step into this situation from the energy of courage, and then just give it a try? And that becomes the feedback loop that starts to retrain the nervous system.
Right. And I like that you bring up it can be micro steps, because Um, I actually can think of a person right now who is puts an obstacle up in front of anything that might make this person feel better or move through life in an easier way. They're constant obstacles. And so they're like dwelling in this way under the line of courage every single day, all the time. And something very, very simple just feels like, a giant yeah, but comes out. That's it. Yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. Like when they know something intellectually, but they know they're just not going to do anything about it.
It's very common actually, because if you look at the map, so we've got shame, guilt, and apathy, and grief here in the red.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in these states, there's very little energy available. And
Right.
so so shame is right above death. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and shame is mapped to, the frequency of 20. And these energies are logarithmic. So it's not just a unit of 10
Right.
that your energy and your power increases. So a lot of times, we think that, we need it's just such an easy thing to step into courage. Well, sometimes you have to ladder up. So if you're
Right.
in shame or if you're in apathy, it's very normal if that's kind of where you've been kind of hanging out, for you to be it's super hard to take action. And so for you, if that's you, it might be to start to tap into anger or start to tap into desire,
Right.
which is kind of this like frequency of wanting. So those
Right.
are going to be more mobilizing energies that will then
Mm-hmm.
allow you to ladder up to a more courageous state.
Right.
But for me, one of the things I will share about my own life is that when I was not conscious of this map and the way energy works, I was actually running my business from the frequency quite a bit of pride, and also running my business from the frequency of uh, unfulfilled desire. And those energies, as you can see from the map, are actually they're quite mobilizing. So you can take action. Even anger, right, is mobilizing. This is why we see people who have been feeling super kind of apathetic about kind of the state of the world. One of the first things they want to do is they want to demonstrate, they want to go out and they want to express their anger through demonstrations. And so it makes a lot of sense. But what I will say from my own experience is that because when you actually are out in the world taking action from, say, anger or from pride, where pride is essentially this feeling of wanting to feel good about yourself at the expense of others, or desire when you're telling yourself that if I can meet this milestone, then somehow then I'll be worthy or I'll be enough or I'll be happy. Those energies are going to get you out taking action, but that action you take is not going to be a generative action. So I was really confused in my own business why I was able to take so much action and I was able to, achieve these milestones, but why wasn't I feeling happy, or why wasn't I excited to get out of bed? Why was I feeling so drained? Well, it's because I was still operating, I mean, there was courage there too, but a lot of pockets of apathy, or excuse me, a lot of pockets of pride, a lot of pockets of desire. And because of that, it wasn't a sustainable, my
Mm-hmm.
work wasn't sustainable. And so that's why a lot of people will complain that they're running into burnout. They're running into burnout because they're not operating from states that are above courage, where the energy now is generative. So it's starting, you're going to add energy, you're going to feel energized, you're going to operate with more energy available to you.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for sharing, especially about the laddering up, because I know people are like,
Yeah.
well, how do I go from this approval ladder all the way to a courage
Yeah.
infuser? Right. So the answer is to ladder up. So that's huge. People, because it is a big jump. And that's
Yeah.
why people get the yeah, but because like if you're talking to somebody and you're like, oh, well, just, people are always giving advice. Oh, well, just do this. Well, if that
Right.
person could have done that, they probably would have done that already.
Yeah.
They're unable to do that. They don't have the energy. They don't have sometimes it's just an exhaustion level. Like I just, no, and
Yeah.
of course wrangled in there are the beliefs that it'll be hard. It won't be sustainable. Like there's all sorts of other crap that you and I know how to work with our clients about. But so stepping into courage is by taking steps, and your first step might not be courage. It might be laddering up. And I love that you mentioned that as you move up, you will get into these states that are states of movement. And because I remember for myself, and I said it out loud, and I must have been in the anger when I got there because I said out loud, I go, this was a long time ago, like 20 years, no, 30 years ago, long time ago. I said, I don't know what life I'm meant to be living, but it sure as hell ain't this one. And I was like, that was my first step into power, my very first. And I had set a pretty powerful intention because I was like, okay, I'm all done. I don't know what to do, but I know I'm all done. So the anger really was, I set an intention. That anger infused me with some movement to discover what is it, what's missing, and what do I need or want. So that was the beginning of my journey into my authentic self and who am I, and moving away from perfectionism and away from seeking approval and outside validation.
It's very interesting because, anger is a beauty. I was kind of talking about some of these states, these heavier states, and how their resources, they can often be a bridge. And, anger is a great one because when you're angry, you know what you don't want. You have a really strong awareness of what you don't want. And so a way to use that as a bridge into courage is to just invert it and ask yourself, okay, then what do I want? And so then that becomes, information and, guidance for you to start moving towards, more of those energizing states. But a lot of us, when we're not aware of the map and how it works, we could judge ourselves. Why am I not taking action? Why am I so stuck? Now I'm angry. What's wrong with me? Judging ourselves for maybe some of these other energies when we don't even realize that we're actually improving, where our state is actually improving.
Right.
And so we could be encouraged. And, that feeling state of encouragement then lifts us even more. But a lot of times we don't see it or recognize it. And so it's really easy. And I think, the other thing to be aware of is that anger is very mobilizing, and if we're aware of how we can use it, how we can flip it, that's fantastic. Then we can start to work with it in a really empowering way. But a lot of us are not aware. We see that it's mobilizing. We see that it's getting us into action. So we just stay there and we just keep being angry. And all the while we're sort of pointing the finger, we're blaming, we're shaming other people, we're making other people the problem. And then that's what we're creating in the world, because the world can only mirror our own energetic state. And we don't realize that we're actually contributing to the problem if we decide we're just going to hang out there. And we're all kind of cycling into pockets of this or pockets of that. But the question becomes, where are you anchoring in? That becomes a really important question.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been such a great conversation. So I always like to leave our listeners before they hit play on the next podcast episode with some, you and I know them as turtle steps, some tiny little thing that someone could do today to move from approval addict into being a courage infuser, to move towards that. Something really small that they could think about or,
Well, I would say the really small thing is, first of all, just be curious. What is it? What would this look like if I approached it from courage? And I think the thing also to remember is that courage doesn't always look like what we think it might look like. We think about courage as, that warrior energy of being loud and taking aggressive action or something like that. We have this kind of cliche or stereotype or prototype in our head of what courage is supposed to look like. But a lot of times courage is just being willing to sit in a chair and tell the truth about yourself instead of making it someone else's problem or making someone else wrong or blaming someone else or, believing crappy things about yourself, asking yourself, what does this situation have to show me about myself? That's courage. And that's the energy that we're asking a lot of us who are coaches or, in the service professions, we're asking our clients to sit in that energy when they show up for a coaching session. And
Mhm.
so it's always the question is, what does it look like for me to courageously turn towards this difficult circumstance or this pattern and just be in curiosity about what that might mean?
Okay, I love that. So the curiosity is huge because curiosity happens without judgment. That's why that's such a
Mm-hmm.
great word and a great concept. So just having the courage to sit with yourself and see yourself without judgment, with curiosity and not
Yeah.
judgment, is huge. I love
Yeah.
that as a small thing that someone can do. Um, and I remember actually doing that myself. I was probably in coaching school back in 2010, and someone gave me the homework to just be curious and not have judgment. So I made little post-it notes and I put them on
Mm-hmm.
all the things I would touch a lot, like like at the kitchen sink because I'm doing dishes a lot, in the
Right.
bathroom on the mirror from washing my hands and brushing my teeth, at the thermostat, which I'm playing with up and down back in the day. And all my sticky note said was, "Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
Isn't that interesting?" And it reminded me to be curious without judgment, and it reminded me to think, what am I feeling right now in this moment? I'm not going to shame myself or judge myself for it. Isn't that interesting? So thank
Yeah.
you for that very small little something that someone can do. So wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So Amy, before we hang up, I know you have something to share with our audience that can help them move forward in this direction if they'd like to know more, do more, step into courage. So, can you share a little bit about what you have and how to get it?
Sure. Yeah. So I have two resources. One is something I created called the Frequency Navigator, and it does work with AI. Essentially, what it is, though, is it's a way to input something maybe that you're struggling with or a circumstance, or maybe there's a thought you keep believing, and then you put it into this navigator, and it will help you to start to explore other ways of thinking so that you can ladder yourself up. So it's a really cool sort of resource. I actually use it quite a bit to help me if I'm sort of confused about something that's going on, or I'm in an energetic state and I know I'm heavy and I'm like, what is going on? Where am I on the map? How can I like see this situation differently so that I can be more courageous? So it's essentially this tool that can help you explore what courage might look like or sound like in your own world. So that's the Frequency Navigator. I believe with that one, if you sign up for that, there's also a mini class that I taught all about the map of consciousness. And then I have another resource. It's called the 5 Day Courage Challenge. It's free. When you sign up for it, you become a part of a community where there are 5 days of just simple mindset things and actions that you can take to start exploring what it feels like more to just kind of be in the energy of courage. Because especially when we've been kind of through it, we can feel really low and low energy. And so it's sort of a way to immerse yourself in courage and get a sense of what it's like and just get some community support while you're doing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I will be sure to put the links to those things into the show notes. So, thank you so much for being here, Amy.
Yay. Thank you for having me. It's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, it sure has, for sure. Okay, so that's our show. And I'm Linda Bucher, guiding people to know their worth, to reconnect with their gifts, and create lives that are fully aligned and deeply impactful. And if you're sensing it's time to bring your life into deeper alignment, you can explore what that looks like at lindabucher.com. And if today's episode sparks something for you, please like it and share it with someone who might need it. And then subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And then join me next week for another expansive, uplifting conversation designed to support your growth. And then until next time, just make sure that you've made this conversation worth your while by fueling the spark that it ignited.